Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Disc Guidance segment with the 2MK team. We're double checking right now that the sound is fine, that the game isn't drowning out my words. But if we're okay, I'll get a thumbs up or some indication, and we will proceed. So we were having trouble finalizing these bots, technically these 3 bots. But after some additional effort today, we've managed to get something we're pretty confident in, even though Leona herself is a little bit hard to explain and might not be finalizable in terms of you being able to watch the stream and know exactly what to do. And you might have to wait until our Sunday release of the bots themselves. But let's go into it immediately, as this stream can be much shorter for a specific reason. The standard way these streams work is that I'll explain why we built the bot the way we did, what it's useful for across at least 1 or 2 characters. In this case they're kind of different, so it'll come up as we switch around. And when the explosions are done, we'll talk about the specifics of the inputs and then some more detailed things such as point systems, which are somewhat developed at the moment, enough that you could put in the bot and mess with it. Now, the reason we can do this so much shorter today is because the actual input segment of the bot is much easier if you input our AngelBot, as it's only changing 2 of the inputs. We're still going to go through them, of course, but not in full detail, because those are fairly simplistic inputs to begin with, and the characters here just use them in the standard way. So you may find that we gloss over that one a little bit, and pay a lot more attention to the first 2 inputs. But before any of that, why we built this bot? Well, that explanation is partially all the explanation we need. The character style that Leona and Heidern use basically is similar to the style of play that you get from Kula and Angel, but with 1 or 2 additional tricks, and specifically they have charge moves, which obviously doesn't work with the inputs we've got. But the first thought was, well, which type of move don't they have? And which one can I therefore replace? And thanks to my foresight and genius, the 2 that need to be replaced are the first 2 action inputs in our AngelBot. So with just changing precisely 2 inputs, you can have this bot functional and ready to go immediately. As for the purposes of the bots in question, they're mostly about training your accuracy and reactions to specific negative situations, but a lot of them are complex because they're much more about thought experiments. You have to be able to keep in mind the reason that you're doing or trying the things you're doing. In short, Leona is about accuracy, trying to make sure you can actually hit her and that you understand when not to try because she has options for stopping you. Heidern is more so about learning when to not advance after you've landed a stray hit, which isn't really something that Leona is teaching. When you manage to hit Leona, which is generally difficult, you mostly want to commit, whereas with Heidern, you don't often want to hit as hard, if at all. There's some with punishing in that one, and a bit of, you could call it hit confirms, but I prefer to think of it as confirming that you shouldn't keep on trying to hit. And that will get a bit of demonstration later. And finally, Ash, who is almost entirely about bulldogging and defense, as you would expect from the style of character that Ash is, if you're not familiar. But for some reason are familiar with Street Fighter, Ash is basically the guile of this game. You have to be able to get in without getting outthought and therefore defeated. But because Ash is similar to Guile, Those of you who have fought Guile players, or any similar character in any other game, know that once they have managed to convince you not to rush straight into their projectiles, then chances are, if you also aren't jumping, they're going to jump at you. Because you're so busy thinking about how to get closer to them, you may have ignored the fact that you put yourself in the perfect position for them to jump. Ash was more so a lucky bonus, because, I mean, charged character. But he does fulfill his function because that's generally how bots work in all cases. You give the character most of their moves and the correct types of gap, and they execute what is probably among their main strategies.
Player 2 wins!
So we're going to go through that round table really quickly. We've been watching Leona for a while, and you can already see that there is quite a bit of influence in terms of figuring out how to get closer to her, but also how to defend against her. This is one of the bots where the setup is for her to have a lot of meter so that she can use a lot of trickery and mess with you, because she is at her core often played as a zoner, and therefore you have to care about her not only keeping you out and being difficult to hit, but doing big confirmations or tricky things when she decides to finally go on offense. You can't just roll through all her stuff, for example. If input properly, which doesn't seem to be terribly hard to do, thankfully, she will occasionally go into some very complex sequences and cause you a lot of trouble. So mostly it's about accuracy and learning to defend against two specific options she has. She does not, under most circumstances, actually use her V-slasher, but that's where the mind game part comes in. You have to think of it as her having the option to do so, but not necessarily actually learn to counter the move itself. Because it's not a terribly difficult move to counter. Even the EX version, you mostly just block it. But because she can do it, it's difficult to be sure whether or not you should anti-air, or even air-to-air in certain situations. Meaning you often want to roll through if you think she's going to, and get a punish from the other side, as she's not really all that great at dealing damage from certain ranges. If you roll through her, you're probably kind of okay. So as you can see demonstrated here, she'll use up a lot of her meter just getting off her. But if you're fighting even just your normal semi-aggressive style, it's perfectly fine because she often will just hit you. And when you have trouble inputting her correctly, it's thankfully really obvious. The bot is input using this character for that reason, and it's a lot easier. But let's move on now, therefore, to look at Heidern in the same concept, who is more of a character for learning how to deal with someone who has extremely long range. All you really have to do against Heidern to learn anything is stand in the right spot, whiff punish, and anti-air. Unlike Leona, where you're explicitly trying not to anti-air too much, here you want to stand at the right spacing of anti-air and recognize still, oh, I should probably try for this hit now because you're doing some other things. Now, that move, as you've just seen demonstrated, is Heidern's way out of this situation. He has moves that will make your life hard if you just aim to play really defensively. But you can defend against them, and you can defend against them in multiple ways, so you might as well learn how to do that too. He generally moves relatively slowly and makes a lot of use of his range, but because he's so whiff punishable, and his hot attacks aren't great, you're mostly just standing very near him and hoping that he messes something up. Because he has the charge moves, the same things happen. One thing you will have to learn, though, and it's super important to learn from a character from this level of, hey, I have this long range, is once you have hit him, in this case it's okay to just hit him with like crouching heavy kick or any other move you've got really, he'll usually recover into a back position. Now you can just run up on him, but you don't learn as much if you just do that, because while he doesn't have particularly good wake up options, the type of character that works like this is more incentivized to use them because their goal is to get you off them. He might just roll on wake up 2, for example. Like that. But a lot of the time, you're better off getting the anti-air, because unlike Leona, he doesn't have really good air options and can be anti-aired decently well by most characters with just grounded anti-airs. Once you've done that anti-air though, most of the time it doesn't actually put him flat on his back, and that means you should be ready to do something else. This also should generally happen if he's hopping at you, and without too much difficulty, he will probably have a hop available to him because of one of the inputs being very precise relative to that. So if you get a stray hit in neutral, if you get your anti-air, you're generally trying to reposition yourself so that you can hit him afterwards, but not immediately strike unless you're super confident. And it's okay to strike as long as you are in fact confident. There's all sorts of reasons why this might be just true for that moment. Depends on which move you used, for example. He's also a very good character for learning, as you saw demonstrated before, how to just, like, use sweep for your anti-air with certain characters. But when he does hop, he tends to end up in a situation where he might still have not hit you, but you ended up just, like, hitting him once, or blocking something, or him blocking something. And you're not necessarily able to capitalize on this because that's just how the character is. So he's a little bit hard to explain in terms of plans and goals, but he's not very hard to explain in terms of point systems, so we'll get to that in a bit. But you will have to defend that move a lot. And the better you are at doing the thing, the more effective he will become. In fact, that's true for all 3 of these bots. The better you perform, the more of their moves will open up, because charged characters tend to have systems in their animations where they're more likely to use extra moves if they were put under pressure, forced to block, or knocked down at specific times. So, if you are just standing there and Heidern is just whipping normals, or even sometimes just random specials in neutral, you're not likely to see a lot of moves that are confusing, and therefore he won't just spam them in. But we can move on quickly to Ash, and then I'll get into inputs. Wrong one. Ash is much simpler. You generally play this somewhat defensively, but defensively from the perspective of, I need to bulldog in on this character, and I must also be ready to anti-air them at nearly any time. This is quite hard for some characters and easier for some others, but in general, anti-airing Ash and making sure that you don't mess up certain aspects of it will get you killed relatively slowly. But a real strong Ash player will most likely be an anchor character and pretty much delete you the moment they touch you. So you've got to learn to simply not get touched as much. And it's again the same situation. The better you are at actually anti-airing, the more likely it is that Ash will do more moves and be more complex to fight. But when he's not posing a threat as an anti-air character, but has somehow gotten so close to you that you feel as if pressure is about to happen, you should learn to use your Shatter Strike. which, I'll remind, is a quarter circle forward with your blowback button. You can generally use this when you just don't know what else to do when he's too close, because he's not a character who's terribly threatening when you're using it. But if your character's blowback is quite short range, you might need to be a little bit careful. One of the main reasons for this is simply to learn what combos you can do from that attack. So you are trying to get in, but when Ash is close to you, just get free damage, just fine. We basically promise you that if he's input even half correctly, you won't just get away with this whenever you like. Because he'll jump, which is kind of the problem. Or he'll do that and you won't be able to continue your combo. It's really frustrating actually. Which is great because that way you can learn more about it. Similarly, as you see here, just being put in this situation changes his rhythm and makes him more likely to use certain specials. He'll go from being in this mode, which kind of lets you hit buttons and try to get in, and he'll sometimes jump, into this mode where he'll just do this sort of thing and use other moves. And this isn't terribly hard to set up inputs wise, so you shouldn't have to worry too much about that. With all that said, therefore, let's go into the inputs themselves once this bit ends. Because I'm fairly sure he'll do something spectacular, because he usually does. Alright then. As mentioned, these are just modifications of a different bot's inputs, but we're still going to go through them pretty quickly. Especially because some of them were changed in a way that's not really all that clear to everyone who plays this sort of game. And I'll change this character on this side as well, since I'm going to show off something else afterwards. But we will get back to, maybe not Ralph, but probably Yashiro later. Both changes, let's go. I will not be actually inputting these because there's nothing to be shown and it's not very easy to explain in that way. If you're not familiar with how to input bots though, within your button configuration you should be able to set record to some button. We like to use L1 while using usually the touchpad to set the repeat during that phase, and you go from one to the other by changing the recording slot here. Alright, let's blitz through these. I'm going to go quite quickly, so I hope you can pay attention or just re-watch this segment whenever you need to. Leona needs to walk backward or hold down back in specific cases here. Hit her blowback button and then hit forward and end the recording really quickly. You hold the blowback button most of the time toward the end. The specifics of this may change a little bit if we find some even trickier way to make it good, but that's the core of it, and when you replay it, therefore you get just this. Now, normally when we're talking about holding something until the end, you would notice that it doesn't replay continually. That'll come up later. But in this case, because she is explicitly holding back at the beginning of the recording, I think I can demonstrate this now. Note that for that moment, just before I'm going to tap it again, she doesn't instantly hit a button. It's hard to see, but she takes a step back before she strikes. And that means that the input itself started that way. When you hit that button, it's often better to go to down back from there, which is why I was saying before. It's a little bit difficult to understand the exact timing, but if you hit down back and the blowback at almost the same time, this should usually happen. And then you just hold down back for a little bit, then quickly flick forward, very close to the end of the blowback attack. When you are doing this, you can learn a specific thing, but I don't want to go into it too much now. Basically, most characters' blowback attack can be cancelled on whiff into a special move, and that will be important, so you can practice using that to do a whiff of her blowback into forward light kick or medium heavy kick, whichever, which will cause her to rush forward with a slash as one of her specials. If you can get that timing right, because there is quite a lot of animation in the blowback itself and in the charge timing, it's quite close in terms of timing, but because you are holding back from the very beginning of the input, all of that time is helpful. This is obviously super familiar to those who know charge characters very well, but I'm just repeating it for the sake of clarity here. This entire animation is almost exactly 40 frames long for that reason, because that's the usual charge timing required. If you find that your input is too quick and is much shorter, or even not that much shorter, I think if it gets down to 34 frames, it is likely not going to do what you want it to do. But at least you have a very clear thing to tell you this is going to work or not work. Once again, remember, hold the blowback until the end, but she will in fact keep on doing the blowback attack. This input is hard to explain, so I'm going to move really close to her. In this case, you will do as quickly as you can after starting the recording up forward heavy punch. And if you've done it as quickly as possible, and you can use the character being very close in order to test it, she will almost always hit a standing character. Now, because of this, you can also then do a quick startup style move. Once you've done that, very quickly do a quarter circle back and end the recording. You can't see it, but this recording is... well, no, I guess you can see it. This recording is super short. The input playing up at the top of the screen, you can see this is literally only 17 frames. You just do those things as quickly as possible, and that's it. If you really want her to have her V-slasher available, but not spam it, then you have to be very careful about making sure that you get that quarter circle back perfect. And it helps to not do it all the way around, to go from 9, i.e. up forward to down forward to down. Try to avoid that if you can. It makes things a little bit dicey later if you do it. But it's not unbearable, and if you find that for some reason the bot seems to work better for you that way, it's probably correct, as it's very timing related, not so much execution. And honestly, that's all of the changes from the AngelBot. But to review that quickly, this input is holding forward, light kick, light punch, and a heavy kick in this case. And you're holding all three of these buttons for the entire recording. Then, basically as soon as it begins, press forward, which will cause her to roll. During that roll, press up forward, and then we do the opposite of what we did on the previous. You go all the way from up forward, to down forward, to down, back. Make sure not to go all the way down to back while still holding all three buttons. It's a lot easier than it sounds. And then end the recording there. You'll note that this recording is also fairly quick, 27 frames. She will, if you've held all the buttons correctly, she won't roll again, because when you hold buttons all the way through an input, they continue to register as having always been hit. So as far as the game is concerned, Leona is just holding those three buttons this entire time while she's jumping around. And because of that, you won't get anything different. This will help to interact with other things to give her a different hop later, and some defense that you might not expect her to get otherwise. Her next input is once again exactly the same as the AngelBot. It is basically a back light kick plus heavy kick. In her case, that gives her that command normal, and then quickly flick forward and end the recording. This isn't meant to give her a special move under most circumstances, but it can help with certain things. But if you, for any reason, input the AngelBot, just don't change anything. It's already set to this. And similarly for the last input, which is down back light kick plus heavy kick, then tap light punch, tap heavy punch, again mostly while still holding the down back, and that's it. In most recordings she will never really do the heavy punch, so everything's fine. Because this isn't a bot where you really need to confirm that things are working correctly relative to each other, you can mostly just tell whether or not an input is working by replaying it into itself. And in the case of the ones I just showed off, you are not holding the buttons until the end, you are pressing them all once again, so it's fine.
Player 2 wins!
In all of the characters' cases, this bot gets full meter to start, and you, the player, get 3 bars of meter. And so, we will once again repeat all of the point systems, and that'll be it, honestly, for the night. We'll stay with this for now. Ralph will come in a little later because of the specifics of that. So, from Leona's perspective, or rather as the bot, you want to block this move. What am I doing? Here we go. But it's not terribly punishable. Usually you will need to use your EX to do it, but to be frank, we don't have a finalized bot system for her yet because it seems to be so varied by character. So block that move and punish it, probably with an EX. That move as well, you might not need to EX for that one, but you might get more out of it if you do. You'll know if it worked because you'll get a punish rating instead of just, oh, I hit. But that one, as you can see, she gets pushed back fairly far, even if you do properly deal with it. When she jumps at you, roll through because her range isn't terribly good, and because chances are the opponent was charging an attack for the opposite direction. So you have a good chance that you've messed them up in some way. She's also fairly punishable as a character from that side. I think those punishes have to be light still. Aside from that, we're not completely clear yet. She has a lot of things where you have to be very aware of what you're doing, and you're generally supposed to fight this bot somewhat aggressively.
Player 2 wins!
But to quickly repeat, block and deal with or punish that move, which is an overhead. This also counts, you can punish that as well as her rushing slash normal version. And when she jumps, roll and maybe do something. Generally if you roll that one as you just saw, nothing good happens. She's a little bit too fast when you end up rolling for no reason and tends to manage a punish, but this isn't true for every character, so. If there is a 4th point system, it's probably going to be quite hard, and it's almost certainly going to be at least somewhat character dependent because there are so many different ways to tackle this one. I remember now, it wasn't Ralph at all. far. For Heidern, it's quite simply, it's very similar and not necessarily all that much more complicated. Block and punish that. That is a cross-up. It does not look like a cross-up, but it is a cross-up. It's not terribly punishable in the EX version, but I think the other one tends to be. When he actually goes for his own jump, you just anti-air him normally, with whatever option. But the important thing is not the anti-air, though the anti-air will be a point, it's the easiest point. The real point system is based on once you've done the anti-air, figure out whether or not you should be attacking right after it based on the range he was at when you anti-aired him. And he's probably going to do a decent job of controlling this, so you don't have to worry about it being too easy or too stale most of the time. He's relatively difficult to, quote, stay in on, and he's relatively difficult to whip punish with nearly everyone, except like Whip, because he has the longest limbs in the game. Other people can extend theirs, but it doesn't help as much. You can also just hit him in neutral in whatever way you can. Usually though, this isn't going to be with your good knockdown option. It's almost always going to be with some quick move that reaches really far but doesn't necessarily knock him down. Or you're going to end up blocking one of his moves and realizing I could counterattack here, but the counterattack isn't going to be guaranteed because of the range things. So sometimes you'll find yourself thinking, I blocked, that's good, I can counterattack here because the pushback, or use an EX or something. But somehow this doesn't result in you actually getting a knockdown. And you have to decide, is it a good idea to actually attack? At that point you have to somewhat decide the point system yourself, because you can't really do much about it. Every character has a specific way that they deal with getting that level of advantage, but we can say that you're mostly not supposed to fight this bot by just using your long range moves as either with punishes or anything else. He actually does have decent counters for this if you're playing against a Heidern player, and they'll usually just lock you down. The bot can't be allowed to lock you down too much or it would be too difficult to deal with. There's possibly a way to improve it, but he quickly teaches you that your ranges are not necessarily as good as you were hoping they were. But you do get a point for the anti-air, you do get a point for hitting him in neutral in whatever way you think is actually difficult, almost always with normals. And you get a point for punishing the slide. And then on top of all that, you also get an additional point when you do manage certain punishes for actually doing a combo out of it. And you can choose what that means to you, because a lot of the time, unlike our usual bots where we just say, go for a full punish, go for the best you can do. This is more so about recognizing what you are able to do at all. So you can even give yourself points for doing nothing if you recognized, no, I definitely was very aware that I should not attack again, and I didn't, and then I whiff punished after that. Often that is when you should give yourself a point for whiff punishing with a special. But we're going to try to make that one a little bit more codified and obvious, but that is the fourth point. In his case, you are not actually supposed to get points for air-to-airs. But if your character does get a lot out of it, or they have special anti-airs that work as if they're air-to-airs and you get stuff after that, it may be worth considering it, just because it's more helpful to do that than it is to just assume that you must anti-air with buttons you don't normally use. As demonstrated here, the more you work on getting close to him and figuring out how to counterattack after ranges, the better he will generally function. And since he's not overwhelming in terms of output, you probably will live through it long enough to get some knowledge. On the other hand, this might happen. But do remember that the better you get at getting this correct, the more his rhythm will change and the more danger you will functionally be in. So, watch yourself. And therefore, onward to Ash. And in this case, we'll probably stick with Orochi Yashiro because there's no specific reason not to. The point systems here are to air Ash's jump. After you've air-to-aired Ash's jump, make some attack. If you are familiar with our AngelBot, there is a specific trick you're supposed to learn about how to hop to attack your opponent directly after air-to-airing them. And in Ash's case, this is not necessarily as advisable, but there is a specific point where it's a really good idea and you can learn it. But this is mostly, again, if you understood what the AngelBot's point was, you can probably work from there. You'll often need to air-to-air Ash because he has some confusing options. And, as you've just seen demonstrated, you usually want to anti-air, but you're anti-airing either his longest jump or his cross-up. And these are two separate points. This is a lot of jump defense. The bot does not actually do the level of cross-up required to get big damage on you, but you can punish him in mostly the same way. Even when he manages the cross-up hop, if you get to the point where you are able to do it on time, you'll be able to adapt fairly easily to doing cross-up hop. And here's. If you have an uppercut style move, you might want to learn to do, as it is called, the cross-cut, but we're not dealing with that here. As it's not only hard to demonstrate, expecting Ash to be in the right position for it is quite difficult. And of course, the final point is not only to land the blowback attack, but explicitly to combo off the blowback attack. Well, rather the Shatter Strike. But of course, for this to work, it can't be just run up to Ash and use it. We're still deciding whether or not we should explicitly tell you not to do that, because you are going to kind of run out of meter, and Ash moves around enough that for many characters, especially the ones with shorter range, you actually won't get away with it in the first place, so we're not necessarily concerned yet. But we'll continue our testing to verify whether or not you should be able to just do that. But in general, the only thing you really need to avoid doing this is like on his way up. So if you're playing here, for example, you're mostly just watching and waiting for the jump, deal with the jump, and you can feel free to just attack him. You won't get any points for doing it, but he generally does things well enough that you can learn a little bit from just, okay, he's just hitting buttons in neutral, maybe I can do something. In this case, you are in fact trying to get the best combo you can from that blowback attack, which is a little counterintuitive for getting more points with the same thing, because the higher you get in your meter, the more likely it is that you will burn all of your meter doing the combo and then have to re-earn it. But that's kind of also part of the bot conception. Once your meter is gone against Ash, most characters can't get more very easily, so that is in fact part of the challenge. You are in fact supposed to use that to try to go through his stuff, hope that you don't whiff, but once you have done so, go for the big damage, because you will learn more if you explicitly use up the meter, bring yourself down to very little of it, and then have to spend a lot more time in the other state. Because there's not much point in learning how to defend yourself against Ash at close range with the Shatter Strike if you're not likely to have enough time to Shatter Strike in the first place. And because of his jump timings and hops, you have just been demonstrated, he will not always be on the ground and you'll have to use a different one. But most characters still have a way to actually do something from there, so it's important to work on that as well. I don't necessarily have any suggestions for any given character because this game is a little bit more complicated than that most of the time. But see what you come up with, see what you find online. And hopefully that will be enough to get you some gains from this bot as well. Of course, you can always change this bot back to AngelBot at any point. And I believe that the inputs are easy enough that you shouldn't have to worry too much about it. But that's all for tonight. That brings us to the end of our guidance segment as of the next fall. You can find all of our other bots on our website 2-mk.org, including the AngelBot itself, which you can look at for help with at least some of the inputs before our release of this bot at 7:30 Eastern on Sunday, around the same time as our Do Not Falter DNF Duel Battle Lounge, or at least the NA version. We are not necessarily having our 60 times content tomorrow, Dead or Alive, or at least if we have it, we might not be streaming it for various reasons. But you can look for us again next Monday and definitely Thursday for Mishmashing Battle Lounge in Street Fighter V and another Feeling Thursday King of Fighters Battle Lounge. With everything else coming up, we'll try to get one of either the Tuesday Melt or Wednesday Night in Birth, but we said that last week and it didn't happen. This has been Rillian, 14-2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.